Let's call the Committee of the Whole open, the meeting open at 8:05. Let's proceed to the adoption of the agenda. I move that the agenda be adopted as presented. All those in favor? Carried. Let's go on now to disclosures of pecuniary interests. None. Delegations and presentations. There are none. I'd just like to mention that there was one item that was considered at the closed meeting. Well, let's just remove item 5.1 then. I move that we remove item 5.1 from the agenda. Seconded. All those in favor? Carried then. That's fine. Councillor Grimard is stressing us out already. Let's go on now to petitions. Letter from the Rockland Field Archers requesting a shooting gallery at the Jean-Marc Lalonde Arena. Now, this particular club has been practicing for a few years, but the administrators of the administrators where they used to practice in said, well, that they couldn't accommodate them anymore, so they were paying $300 at the previous venue they were using. Well, we have an hour rate. We'd like to respect the hourly rate that's been pinpointed already. So if they make use 2 hours, they should pay 2 hours worth of rental fees, unless another directive from council that goes against that. Well, I believe that the archery club has also sought help from other quarters, and they were refused. You know, at a certain point in time, it's hard to manage this, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Grimard, do we know from an equipment standpoint? I know we're talking about archery. They all have their individual equipment. They have things very well under control. It's very well organized. I believe that Mr. Boucher saw them at work also. They're very well organized. They like to make use of the Jean-Marc Lalonde Arena to hold their activities because they can hold a shooting gallery that it's a non-profit organization. Yes, they'd be offered the same rate as we offer other non-profit organizations. So we'll just inform them that they'll be offered the non-profit rate. Fine. Item 5.3, NAFTA Dairy Supply Management Program. You've had occasion to take a look at at what's happening with NAFTA. The U.S. requests pose a great danger to our dairy managers and our dairy producers. There are huge investments right now to expand farms. We don't need Mr. Trump to let us know that we need to have American milk come into our market. They'd like to have in the U.S. the same quota system as we have here in Canada. I'd like us then to second this particular letter, to support this letter. I believe it's a very good cause. Fine. So do you want a resolution ready for the next regular meeting of council? Yes. To this effect? Yes, indeed. Notice of motion, question period. Are there any questions of council? None? Fine. Report from the United Counties of Prescott and Russell. It's going to be held this coming Wednesday, the meeting, so I have no report for you. Can we have the opportunity to ask questions in previous council meetings? No. I believe that east of Saint-Jean, around the baseline there, the folks have to drive sort of like an S-curve around that area, and it's in very poor shape. The roadway is in very poor shape. At a certain point in time, we're going to have to think of repaving or at least reworking this I call it a descent, this part of the roadway that goes down. Yes, this is our road, actually. Baseline from Saint-Jean to Joannis belongs to the United Counties. Yes, but he's referring to what's to the east of that. It's very dangerous, Mr. Mayor, and I nearly hit an object in that particular area. So, and I complained about it. Is this amongst those projects for 2019 that will be quickly taken care of? Let me tell you, it's extremely dangerous, and the asphalt is in very poor condition. As soon as there's a rainfall, the gravel winds up in the middle of the roadway. Isn't there a gate around that area? Well, there's a culvert project that's underway around that area. I see. If you rely on your memory, is there something that will be done for this particular stretch of roadway? Well, I believe that this will be considered because of safety issues. We'll consider to set up a guardrails around that area, or will be at least revamped. I believe that we're not just talking about guardrails, but even then the south side of the roadway should be fixed. That's where the problem is. Water seeps over the roadway and brings in gravel on top of the roadway. And let me tell you that during the summertime, when water freezes, it becomes a veritable skating rink, really. Even then, gravel remains pooled in some areas, causing a lot of distress for drivers. Item 9.1, accessory structures. Mrs. Choinière. The Committee of the Whole recommends to Council to mandate the Infrastructure and Planning Department to bring forward a zoning bylaw amendment to reduce the height of an accessory building in the residential zones of the urban area of Rockland from 5 meters to 3.8 meters. Seconded by Councillor Zent. Any questions? Councillor Grimard. It's a great report. We received the information quite quickly. That dates back to about 2 weeks ago. They made comparisons with other structures. I'm in agreement with the height, though. I believe that if we keep a certain percentage aside without setting a given height for the urban residential zoning areas, for example, in between two homes, let's say some properties are smaller. So if we take into account 5% at the edge of a street, one part of a property, if we take into account 5% of a neighboring property, the space allotted is much smaller. I think that we're allotting, I believe, 8%, where there are neighbors to the left and to the right. It's tantamount to a smaller piece of property. Well, you see, the norm that's set aside is basically, or proposed, is basically 8%. I'm in agreement that the standards call for 8%. We're voted in to look into the City of Clarence and Rockland's best interests. If the property is smaller, it would impact on this. If the 8% goes over and beyond the maximum square feet allowable, we should keep to the square footage, maximum allowable square footage that's allowed. Is this something reasonable to set in a square footage limit in a residential property? I believe so, yes. Otherwise, we'll wind up with a situation where the building would be much bigger because of a corner lot, for example, and it will impact the balance of this area. Councillor Choinière, when I take a look at discrepancies from one municipality to another, one allow 50%, others 10%, others 5%. Others talk about 50% of the backyard. We're going with 8% of the property as a whole. Maybe we might adopt an additional mother that would cover the backyard. Well, if we were to be a bit more precise and stating you have the right to have that much size property if your whole property measures, or if your surface measures such and such an amount. Dealing with accessory dwellings. There are some properties that are fairly small, I know this, but there's a certain minimum, there's a certain surface minimum that you need to respect to make use of an accessory building. Also, there are some individuals that have Winnebagos that would wish to build a roof on top of the said Winnebago or similar structures. Fine. Do we have a lot of those in the municipality? Well, not really, Councillor Choinière. I believe the rural areas have those buildings that might house Winnebagos, but not in residential areas. I think the responsibility is incumbent upon us to ensure that those living in residential urban areas, you know, do not face similar type situations. If we are to have a 16 by 22 shed as an accessory building, would be excessively large in this urban residential area. Well, it depends on the surface of the property. If that individual has a big property, yes, but it depends. If someone has a corner lot, he'll be allowed to build a bigger accessory dwelling in proportion to others on the street. Well, in a given area, you won't have a property that will be noticeably bigger. There are some that are bigger in some areas than others. But if we keep within this margin of leeway, well, I did like your suggestion, to wit, 8% of the backyard. Well, it would have to be more than 8% because backyards are measure usually 10 by 20. Mr. Leonard, well, there are different comparables in between different municipalities. When you take into account the total surface, often we'll take into account 8% of the total surface set aside for accessory dwelling purposes. Let me just give you an example. When we're talking about up to a maximum of 92 square meters, some municipalities do adopt this type of contingency. Now, however, there are other things that need to be amended to the zoning bylaw. So what we could do then, when we'll bring about other amendments, we can determine at that time what can be expedient. Or, well, if we translate this into square footage, it's going to be a massive area. Well, as opposed to the total surface of the property, 12 square meters. 8% would be tantamount to 92 square feet, should I say. Let's just explore the possibility of imposing a maximum in an urban residential zone. That's fine. And we're in agreement that given comparables, it hovers around, let's say, 12 by 14, which would be the maximum. Somebody who wants to build an accessory building measuring 8 by 10 can do so. If someone wants to build something that measures 14 by 16, he can ask for a special exemption. Councillor Levert, I'm in agreement with what you're stating, basically, but let's say if we don't want more than 250 square feet, that might be applicable for residential areas. But let's not forget that the City of Clarence and Rockland wards have some lots that are much bigger and that are part and parcel of the Clarence and Rockland designated area per se. Those who have 2 acres, for example, that reside within the urban zoning area, I think we're talking about at cross purposes. I'm talking about the Morris Village or other type of developments. Well, I wouldn't want us to impose a limit because these people that are still within the living within an urban area would be impacted. Well, for me, urban residential areas host fairly intensive development projects and dense projects. Well, I would say such and such a size lot, such and such maximum allowable square footage would be allowed. If it's closer to a rural area or smack dab at the middle of rural areas, we might adjust then. Mr. Leonard, are you noting this down? I believe you're entering into very constructive discussions here, but how we could go ahead and how we could come up with an alternative or a recommendation to amend the bylaw is another matter, other than those considerations that you've raised as concerns, for example. So the department could take a further look at this. So we'll just have this department come back to us with additional suggestions. So you've noted down our comments, have you? Well, if I understood what you've asked of us is to take a look at the different options offered to us. I like 8% for those that have big lots, but for those who are living in recent developments, I believe that's very big, especially for those who are living in a sort of in a pie chart type configuration or at a corner lot or living on a corner lot. They'd have disproportionate amount allowable to them. Well, let's just take different proposals stemming from different areas around this table, and let's just come up with a directive that could allow us to amend the bylaw as it now stands. Well, Mr. Mayor, the resolution right now deals with the height. Now, the administration's recommendation was to modify the height of accessory dwellings right now, but the council did not ask us to bring about any modifications as to the width or the size. If you want us, we can come back and revisit this. When do you think you'll come back with additional suggestions? If we set aside this 8% contingency for another 3 years? No, our basic goal is to take care of this early on in the next year. Councillor Lalonde, I'm in agreement, Mr. Mayor, that we go with the percentage. There are some properties that measure 33 feet wide, others 100 feet wide. So dealing with surfaces, for each property surface, one might differ from another. We can have some parameters that would state, for a certain size lot, you'd be allowed so much. What I propose is that we keep the 8% with the 3.6 and that they come up with further options. Fine, Mr. Leonard? Fine, Mr. Mayor. Can we add that onto the mandate that we're giving Mr. Leonard tonight? Yes. Fine, Mrs. Ouellette. So you've noted that down, that Mr. Leonard, the department comes back with the options that would make sense given the multiple proportions of properties that we contend with at present. Councillor Chouanière? Yes, fine. And you would like the department to come up with different options given the diversity of property sizes within the City of Clarence and Rockland confines. Fine. All those in favor? Carried then. Let's go on now to the SharePoint project. Councillor Zant. The Committee of the Whole, Mr. Mayor, recommends that Council adopts a bylaw to authorize the Mayor and the Clerk to award a contract to Stone Share Incorporated to implement the SharePoint document and records management intranet project as described in RFP number F18-ADM-2018-027 for an amount of $171,450, excluding HST. And that's seconded by Mrs. Simard. Any questions? Councillor Zet. Mr. Kehoe, I believe that's your project, is it not? Or is it Mrs. Ouellette's responsibility? It's always been Mrs. Ouellette's responsibility. Oh, I see. Well then. When we deal with computerized systems like that, I always have some misgivings because I'm living through the infamous Phoenix experiment right now. It seems as if IBM with the Phoenix project just washed its hands of the whole matter, and we're caught with billions to pay to correct. Now, if there are any similar type of discrepancies that do occur, will this company, SharePoint, correct any discrepancies? Or do we have to revisit that in 6 months? And well, Mr. Mayor, what we've asked is that the SharePoint project be implemented without resorting to customization. So it's out of the box directly. So we're not anticipating any problems per se. There's a lot still yet to be done from a documentation standpoint. So we'll be tackling this end of things business-wide. But when we come back when we revisit this, when we'll be looking at the capital budget expenditures to be set aside in the coming budgetary talks, and we can look at it further. Fine. Does our I team have does it have the capacity without incurring additional costs, Mr. Mayor? Danny Petrello, who's the town's IP management or manager, sat on the committee and he made the necessary arrangements to ensure that our system work quite well with the SharePoint system. Mrs. Ouellette, I can answer this question even further with regard to the maintenance of the system once it's put into place, once it's implemented. Because we are working with an out-of-the-box system, we'll be operating it internally, and we won't need anyone from outside of our expertise to maintain the system. For the implementation, yes, but not for the maintenance. When we'll enter into a new phase of implementation, that's when we'll have to come up with another business case and seek outside help. We're talking about $171,000 here. Yes, once they'll have completed the implementation process, we'll have the document management system in place and made available to us for $171,000. But not all data will have been entered then. But do we think that there's a license to be paid each and every year? Yes, there ought to be supplementary costs, I believe, attached to this at item number 8. It does state that the implementation of the said project, if there are things to be put in, accessory fees, we talk about consulting fees. So we're not compelled to hire additional staff, but we need some temporary help to implement the system right now. Well, everything can be done with given staff, with our present staff. Mrs. Ouellette, there might be some staff, Mr. Mayor, an administrative assistant targeted to ensure the input of data or scanning additional data to be put into the document bin. There's a lot of also filing to be performed so that documents are put in an orderly fashion within the system. Are we talking about overtime here, or? Well, we might propose this later on, maybe in about 6 months' time from this point here. But in the meantime, you'll have an opportunity to take a look at the existing budget to determine what's being requested. At this point in time, we're looking at a temporary employee hired, maybe a summer student for that purpose. Councillor Grimard, with regard to data input, how far back do we need to look? Because we're talking about a massive work. If we're talking about digitizing 2 years or 4 years back from this point in time, in light of data entry, well, we're going to start now and proceed forward. And from that point on, we might consider looking back, given the budget we'll have on hand. So all active files or matters dating back to, let's say, 2017 that have been closed, we'll keep them in paper form. Yes, we do have a document retention bylaw, so the permanent documents will be digitized and put into the system. But what disappears, what we're called upon to destroy after 1 year, it's not worth digitizing. So we're going to have to take a look at the document retention system and work with that. From a legal standpoint, then, we don't need to necessarily digitize all documents as long as we still have access to paper documents, because we do have to keep documents in our files 5 or 7 years back. It depends, of course, on the matter. As long as we have a paper copy, that's fine. Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Lalonde, if I take a look at page 35 or page 65, Mr. Mayor, the documentation, part 4, terms and conditions of pre-process, item 4.1.2.
Of proposal are to be in English only. Any proposal received by the purchaser that are not entirely in the English language may be disqualified.
So, Yes, Mr. Mayor, the reason why this was put in is this. The assessment team that we were working with, we had Anglophones, we had an Anglophone consultant working on the team, and in any event, the system will be operating solely in English. It's an operational system that operates strictly in English. This means that an individual that wants to submit a quote in French will be disqualified? No, that's not what it means. No, we're talking about the RFP quote. They wanted to make sure that they also had an English copy because there were some members of the committee that were unilingual English. Fine. So the computer program that we're seeking is English. The operating system, well, it doesn't exist in French? Well, maybe, but we want to work with the English version of this particular program. The interface may be bilingual, but the back operating system will be English. If it's bilingual, it cannot be French unilingual. It could be bilingual, but at this point in time, the operating system, strictly the operating system, is in English and nothing more than that. All those in favor? Carried then. Thank you. Thank you for the notice, Mr. Guillemard. Let's go on now to the budget status report as of August 31st, 2018. Councillor Levert, that report number FIN 2018-035, being the financial operating budget status for the period ending August 31st, 2018, be received as information. Seconded by Councillor Lalonde. Any questions? Yes. Could it not be possible to transfer the $130,000 and $180,000 surplus and put it into the road reserve? We'll be tapping into $225,000 to complete the project, but it would at least make up for the shortfall. We know how important it is to work on ensuring that we have proper roadways, and we could tap into that fund, and we're actually now making use of the roads budget to ensure a development project. So it might. Councillor Kehoe? Well, it's only an estimate at this point in time, Mr. Mayor. We're not talking about a year-end result. At the year-end, this can be put into general reserves, but we could have a recommendation from council at the end of the year to have it transferred to another reserve. Only at the end of the year? Well, because we're not sure, of course, as to the exact amount. The amount might change. Notwithstanding the amount, however, the surplus amount, could we not say that it would be, well, at the end of the year, we'll wind up with a new council? Oh, yes, quite right. Yes, quite right, Mr. Mayor. I forgot that fact. Councillor Zant? Oh, that's fine. Fine. I was lost in thought here. We're still dealing with item number 3? When I take a look at daycare services, that budgetary item.
I don't have a master's in math, but we're projecting a $29,000 deficit, but could get a third grant from the United Counties of $125,000. At the end, it says no deficit or surplus on this item. There would be a surplus. 125 minus 29. I just want to understand it because it's not very clear in here. I see them kind of getting all frazzled. So.
Well, as things stand at present, Mr. Mayor, the funds that we do receive from the United Counties has a third payment, $325,000. That's included in our budget. But this amount will not be concerned until the end of November, so I don't know if I'll have the full $125,000. There's a $125,000 amount that remains uncertain at this point in time. However, the additional $29,000 is a sure thing, yes. I don't want to. Every time we talked about daycare,
you know, if we charge this much, we should be fine. I know it's impossible to predict who's going to leave and who's going to come. I get that. But when are we going to actually charge a bit more to try to end in a surplus position? That way we can actually better understand and be able to adjust the rates the following year. On dirait qu'à toutes les...
It seems that each and every time that we're confronted with this situation, we're always facing a deficit. I know that $29,000 is a small amount as compared to the $200,000 amount that we were faced with beforehand. But I believe that we're faced with this situation each and every year. Do you have an answer to that?
$500,000 that we dealt with last year.
And I understand.
Yeah, so we're also, council directed us to have a break-even budget, which is, and we're pretty close given that it's a $5 million budget with the 29,000. And that could be plus or minus. Right now, this is what we're projecting based on the tool that we've been using, based on the attendance that we've had against the expenses we've had to date.
No, I understand that. It's just that our goal when we budget is to try to get into surplus positions on certain things, right? Like it break even,
No,
but
no.
well, break even. I know it's hard to break even on the daycare, but I'm tired of always discussing deficits on it and going, okay, well next year it'll be fine. We'll be fine. And again, we kind of are protecting.
Better, Mr. Zed.
I know we're doing better, and I acknowledge that
A
earlier.
lot better this year than what we ever did,
I know,
so.
but it'd
We're
be
on the
nice
right
to not
track.
have a deficit.
Madame Choignard?
Well, we're taking care of the daycare centers, but the Ministry of Education requires that daycare centers be run within school grounds, but they don't care about extra expenditures. But I can't understand why school management does not have control over daycare centers. If the Ministry of Education requires that daycare centers be managed within schools, I don't know then why the Ministry of Education would not manage the funds. They ought to absorb that deficit. They ought to oversee the local management if it's run within schools. And certainly they could set down directives as to how many children could be allotted to each educator. That's why our employee amount has increased dramatically. We need 1 employee per 3 toddlers or 5 children per workers. And the government doesn't make any payment whatsoever. And often they will require, I don't know, we might need, a lot of parents might want to have an age group, toddlers, preschool age toddlers. If they had that responsibilities not to lose those parents and those youngsters within that particular school, I'm sure they'd make do to come up with available space to ensure that these youngsters be kept in their own schools. That's something that I'll bring to the United Counties of Prescott Russell's attention so that this be brought back to the ministries under the ministry's guidance. If some children need medical guidance or medical help there, it doesn't make sense that maybe with the new government we'll run a better chance, but that it... Councillor Guérimard, to end on a positive note, I believe that these reports give us a good idea as to where we stand at present. They came up with a very detailed report. I think it requires our staff to come up with a lot of detailed projections, and therefore there's a lot of work involved, and we can see the problem in greater perspective now with the report that we have in hand. Good work. Councillor Lalonde, a question here. Mr. Mayor, they mentioned that we should not incur any surpluses or any deficits, but I can't understand why we're not, having a surplus in this particular category. Well, when we are dealing with this type of report, we're looking at the major varying factors. I'm not saying that we won't have a surplus. I'm sure that we'll come up with a surplus. When we're talking about $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, we're looking at smaller items. So your salary is not high enough, right? Is that what you're telling us right now? Right. But if we were to talk about Mr. Hio's salary there, that might be important. But all those in favor, by the way? All right, let's go on now. Mr. Mayor? Mr. Kehoe, is there something you wanted to say? Did you want to talk about hockey? Not hockey tonight, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor?
Good news that we received today. We got the letter from OPP for the service for next year. We've received confirmation that it'll cost us about 28,000 more for policing in 2019. So that's a good amount. We used to have $100,000, $120,000 increases, so that's a good thing. Even better news, Mr. Mayor, is, and we'll follow up on some of the details with OPP, but apparently there was a surplus or a credit of $57,000 in 2017. Because our books were closed in 2017, we're going to be showing that as revenue in 2018. So that's an additional 57,000. So we said 150 plus 57. So we're starting to see more room in terms of creating a surplus, which is good news for the city.
Good work. Thank you very much. Subdivision Verdun.
Let's go on to the Verdun division. Councillor Simard? Yes. That council adopts a bylaw to authorize the mayor and the clerk to sign a contract with Etrel Engineering Limited in the amount of $85,895 for the design and engineering services for the Verdun subdivision file, seconded by Councillor Chouanière. Any questions? All those in favor then carried. Water main looping update for Landry and Russell Roads. Councillor Lalonde, please. That report INF 2018-037 be received for information purposes. Questions, Councillor Chouanière? No. I believe they've nearly completed work on Landry Street. Yes, they're close to finishing work. They're just finishing up work along the entranceways where some damage occurred. What I liked that was done on Russell Road is that they removed the lights there that allows free access during the weekend. Now, they just freed up that available space, and I were a bit more tolerant during the week, knowing that during the particular weekend we won't be inconvenienced. So let's just thank STP. That might have been also a request stemming from the United Counties, because they wanted everything to remain in place when work was being performed on Landry Street. Yes, of course. It was a lengthy process. You couldn't even see the end of the light at the end of the tunnel with regard to this. Fine, let's go on to the next item. Erosion of Creekside slope along properties 1058 and 1052 Baseline Road. Councillor Lalonde. The Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve option 1, being that the city assumes no responsibility and no financial liability for the erosion of the Creekside slope along private properties located at 1058 and 1052 Baseline Road. Seconded by Councillor Zant. Any questions? Councillor Lalonde. I believe that we have two residents with us. Mr. Laviolette is one of those that two of those are impacted by this situation, and this situation has been lasting for quite a while now. I do understand the department's position, and potentially it's in the interest of the municipality to do what it did, but it's certainly not in the interest of the impacted residents. When we're when we're resorting to development, we always say to individuals, well, keep your water where you are. You have to assume control over water resources. We say this to all developers that develop within the city of Clarence and Rockland, or individuals that will build individual homes. But when we're talking about the erosion of slopes, especially along that area that has persisted for the past 20 or 30 years, and erosion that has been persisting, certainly in between those two properties, during that time frame, I believe that the municipality still has a responsibility to ensure where erosion, sediment runs into. I know there are three options before us. Option 3 states that we should give money to those residents to have them fix the situation. But there's no way we'll have a guarantee of what will be done if we go via that route. I'm of the opinion that we ought to make use of the easement option to alleviate those two residents' situation and difficulties. If we don't do anything, what's inevitably going to happen is this, is that there's going to be some matter that's going to tumble down in that area, and what are we going to do? We're going to have to redo the ditches? Well, we'll have to come up with an assessment and to determine how much it's going to cost us. Option 1, Mr. Mayor, calls for municipal drain to force the hand a tad bit of, well, not to do anything, actually. A municipal drain always remains there, Councillor Lalonde. Now, by doing so, it will impact residents to a greater extent, because they'll, according to what Mr. Legault had mentioned, it would afford them a bit more space to do what needs to be done. Well, there's another drain that goes through Clarence Creek. That's what you're referring to, and does not have any bearing on the current situation. Mr. Lennart, maybe you might have a comment as to this? Well, it seems as if there might be a bit of confusion concerning option number 1 here, but really, Mr. Legault had occasion to meet with the residents, Mr. Mayor, and at this point in time, Mr. Legault or Mr. Leroux, what's located under the municipal drain right up until we received a petition whereby this became a municipal drain. Well, this then fell outside of our staff's expertise. And option 1, this being said, option 1 states that the municipality recognizes that this is a natural drain, and in keeping with common law practices, natural drains are defined quite clearly, and in keeping with the common law principles that are applicable, the city of Clarence and Rockland are not responsible for erosion or damages caused along that creek area. The same rule applies to those properties that are or property owners that are not responsible for repairing creeks or creek beds that are subject to erosion. We're dealing with rights and responsibilities that are pinpointed under common law or by common law principles as being applicable to the situation. Now, if the creek fills up, where does the water come from to fill up that creek? Well, Mr. Mayor, the water stems from a watershed that's quite wide. So everything that drains in naturally, because it's a natural creek, but it drains from, well, it drains from all of the agricultural property surrounding that area and from surrounding properties. Now, this creek that is kept in a natural, under its natural guise, if you wish, all of those people at the beginning of the drainage line can drain into this if it's a natural drainage system that exists there. So there are no drain that belongs to the city of Clarence and Rockland that drains into that. Well, there are some ditches, but you do have the right to drain a ditch into a natural creek. Well, I understand. I don't know if that's where Mr. Lalonde was heading at, but you all understand that if our drain that empties into a basin that then empties into a creek, well, we're liable to a certain extent. You know, I live in an urban and not in a rural area, but I'm trying to get a grip on things. If we play a part in the drainage situation. We're a part of the problem also, are we not? Well, Mr. Mayor, that's again subject to common law practices. If we decide to take this one step further, then the matter would be decided by a judge, by a court, basically. Now, in this particular instance, in keeping with common law principles, when we're dealing with the natural drain, those that are upstream have the right to drain away water in the natural environment. So if there's a basin that seeped into that drain naturally, we might be held liable. But in this particular case, it always drained in that direction. The same quantity drains in that direction. As this has been giving rise to problems since 2003. Well, not necessarily now, because it's not because of that problems arose. It's because of erosion that does occur, because we're dealing here with unstable soil. We did not cause this. We're not responsible for this, because their water that drains into the creek that causes the erosion further down are no more responsible for that particular erosion. This deals with the rights and privileges inherent to a natural drain and what drains into a natural creek bed. Do you think then that a judge will vote in favor of us? Well, all matters dealing with a natural drain. It's clear that the drain has to remain in its natural state. If we change anything, if we change the speed of the water seepage or the volume of the water, then we'll cause further erosion and we'll be held liable. But because we haven't brought any modification and we haven't changed the infrastructure, we consider this as being a drain that remains in its natural state. But we like to make use of the drain. Look, if you would have told me, Mr. Leonard, that the city of Clarendon Rockland does not empty any water into this. It's a natural drainage phenomenon whereby, Mr. Zant, you might view this area. I know, Mr. Mayor, but we've confirmed that we make use of this. Indirectly, we make use of this drainage network. Well, those upstream may use this. I understand that we're not alone in all of this. But just to wash our hands of this and say we're not responsible. Yes, but the water's share of the volume of water seeping in is minimal. Yes, but it's difficult to define the impact. Mr. Zant, we know this in advance. Councillor Chouanière, notwithstanding, if the law states that it's a natural drain, the definition will not be modified. Everyone can make use of it, but no one is held liable. This is not a drain that has been maintained, that has been created under certain conditions to cater to the needs of certain surrounding properties. I understand your position. I understand it. The onus is not upon the city of Clarendon and Rockland to get involved in this, because we'd be creating an unbelievable precedent if we were to do otherwise. Well, the solution would be to apply to have it converted into a municipal drain, and everybody would pay for that. Maybe you're not in agreement with me, but the fact is that we have Cobbs Lake Drain in Clarence Creek. This is a municipal drain. It covers a huge surface. It starts from my residence and runs down to Fournier and Saint-Bernardin. And it's paid by everyone that's impacted by this. So there are a whole bunch of solutions that are applicable to this situation, Mr. Laviolette. I'll hand you over the sheet of options available to us so that you have a better picture of what we're contending with at the end of the meeting. Well, everybody would be called upon then to pay for this. This is not the biggest invoice that a ratepayer would receive, maybe under $100. Someone would be called upon to pay $5 or even $20. Not much. It depends on the number of properties that are impacted by this. But the municipal drain, well, the province decides as to how much water goes into that drain, and they're the ones that decide how much it's going to cost. The municipality collects the money, but the province decides, in keeping with their maps, what water goes into such a drain, and everybody's charged along the water course that this drain, or along those properties that this drain drains into or close to. I understand your point of view to convert it into a municipal drain, but from an owner's standpoint, we are impacted. We are affected by this, and it's not the best solution, Mr. Mayor, because we don't have anything anything negative to say. Well, if I take a look at what the work they did on Mr. Meloche's property along Baseline, they did some good work there. They didn't cost millions to do this. I understand, but we're not talking about the same depth of ditch here. But when we're dealing with municipal drains, we have to rely on engineers' expertises that come up with specifications. If they're called upon to dig along our properties to enforce the slopes, we have nothing to say in all of this. We'd be content with this. Sean and I have already put in money into this. We've been working on this for quite a while, and we'd prefer that option number 2 be adopted. Grant you an easement. It stands to reason, of course, that the amount would be a bit higher to reestablish the bottom of the ditch, stabilize the slopes, because we've been contending with this since 2003. I would myself prefer that option number 2 be adopted. The work would be very well done. It would be less costly for everyone involved. We'd have better results, and we'd have a say as to what would be done to our property, you understand. Well, as things stand right now, sir, there's nothing set aside in the budget for that purpose. This would have to be decided by the next council and would have to be included as a budgetary envelope item for next year. It would have to be brought back to council's attention after December 1st to be considered by the new council. Mr. Leonard would come up with extra money. I don't think, Mr. Laviolette, that things work that way. I believe that you all have my cell phone number. If you want to take a look at the state in which the ditch is in right now, I've forwarded a photograph to you, but it doesn't do justice to the situation. I'm in the process of losing my cedar hedge, even though I'm shoring up this area. Sean's also losing a bit of his part of his shed, and this erosion situation is not caused by water stemming from our particular properties. I understand. I'll give you a call this week and see what we can do. Fine. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All right, then. So we'll defer. Well, my heart reaches out to those residents. I know there's a bylaw that has been implemented that regulates this situation. I know they're located at the bottom of the hill, and their property is being eroded. We have to think about the proper thing to do in spite of the precedent situation. I've been sitting at this council table for the past 4 years. I've never faced a similar type situation. I don't know, Mr. Mayor, if you faced another situation, or Councillor Chouinière has faced another type situation. Maybe we can't do anything with regard to the budget this year, but let's take a look, Mr. Mayor, at being able to develop an option that would compel us to take on a bit of responsibility, that would have this drain, empty elsewhere. If I was a taxpayer and I was looking at my property being slowly but surely eroded, even though I'm paying my taxes year in and year out without being able to do anything, what can I say? We might enter into a precedent, but we're voted in to take decisions that will have an impact on our ratepayers' quality of life. So we have an estimate as to the costs involved right now. Let's put in a couple of $1,000s more to come up with a logical follow-up so that future generations will not be punished by this situation. If this house or this property is put up for sale in coming years, future generations will not be punished by this. We have a moral responsibility facing this dilemma. Councillor Chouinière, we also have a moral responsibility to prevent other citizens to spend money to manage a situation that might be managed otherwise. Even if it was a problem in 2003, the request ought to have been made to convert this into a municipal drain. It would have been maintained at this point in time. and we would not wind up in a situation similar to this one right now. Well, be built, Mr. Guillemot, please, Mr. Guillemot. I think it's important, Mr. Mayor, not to create this type of precedent because we're faced with a great deal of situations that need yet to be settled and goes against the act as it stands. We're asking our departments to be as fair as possible in reinforcing our bylaws or enforcing our bylaws, but there are situations where the departments are compelled to circumvent some provisions of the bylaw to make everybody happy. So we can't send out two different messages. A municipal drain is not all that costly. It wouldn't be the onus of everyone that are property owners to pay something to correct the situation. I have a motion to defer this. I'm the one that moved this. I move that this be deferred. Seconded. All those in favor to have this matter deferred at a further date? Fine. All those in favor? Fine. We'll defer it. It will be brought back later. It would have to be brought back for further consideration after the 1st of December because we don't have the money for it right now. Come up with an option to convert it into a municipal drain and an option to perform repair. I know that if we opt for a municipal drain, for the municipal drain option, that's one thing, but then the city of Clarence and Rockland will not take care of it if it's a municipal drain. I would ask that this be brought back as soon as possible before the next round of budgetary talks to take a look at the figures or amounts involved, and if council deems it proper to put in adjustments, that it be put into the budget ASAP. But we can't work on any type of budgetary items before the new council is voted in. But I'd like you to consider this, Mr. Mayor. Fine then. Let's go on now to a proposed Caron Street subdivision, CH Clément Post-Development Emergency Overland Flow Route Analysis. Councilor Grimard, whereas the administration met with the developer and his consultants, and whereas the developer provided an in-depth analysis that supports the design and meets the department's requirements, that the Committee of the Whole recommends that Council approve the design scenario provided in McIntosh Perry's Post-Development Emergency Overland Flow Route Analysis dated September 14, 2018, as reported in Report INF 2018-042, seconded by Councillor Zlant. Any questions? It's a great solution. Let's go ahead with it. All those in favor then? That's fine. All right. Fee reduction request from Upper Canada District School Board for site plan amendment, Rockland District High School, 1004 St. Joseph Street. I should not read that because it becomes a frustrating exercise. Councillor Chouanière, that the Committee of the Whole, Mr. Mayor, recommends that Council refuse to reduce the engineering fees for the Rockland District High School. Seconded by Councillor Grimard. Any questions? All those in favor? Well, this is not the first time that a school board has made major changes, caused difficulties afterwards, and succeeded in doing all of the work before us intervening and saying, why did you do that? This is not what we asked you to do. I don't know how a school board can go this far up with works before the municipality is called upon to intervene. I don't know if it's because the staff can't follow up. Well, these folks just do what they do and nobody asks any questions because they're a school board. That's why I'm asking this question. Is it because we have no policy that allows us to follow up on this? Or do they have the guts, or the school board has the guts and they just don't care and do what needs to be done? Mr. Leonard, it seems to me they have no interest in cooperating with the municipality. Mr. Leonard, Mr. Mayor, in this case, what happened was this. They didn't even have a site plan prepared for our use. For us, it's very difficult, number one, to act, and number two, to determine what's going on, given these circumstances. When we were made aware about 90% or 80% of the work was already done. Well, are they subject to a penalty or a fine, a fairly hefty fine? This has happened twice now. They have to be answerable for this. This type of situation has come up twice in the past. They need to be subjected to a severe penalty before going forward with this type of project in the future. Mr. Labonte, if you want to carry on a conversation, I'm just asking you to lower your voice, please. So, are there penalties? What are the consequences? I mean, they're getting a small rap on the knuckles and say, well, the work's done, what can we do? Well, Mr. Mayor, at present, the only recourse we do have is to go to court. Now, what we're trying to implement are set fines within our site plan bylaw that would allow us to apply fines. At present, we don't have. So even if you were to modify the bylaw, it would not be applicable for this type of situation. No, the bylaw would not be retroactive. It's unbelievable, Mr. Mayor. Can you imagine the type of message that's given to the people tuning into the ratepayers at large? I'm telling you. I find it unfortunate, Mr. Mayor. It's inconceivable that school boards laugh at us openly and mock the process openly. And it has an impact, an influence on traffic flow and everything else. And then they're going to ask us to resolve their problems or to solve their problems. Councillor Zant. Mr. Mayor, I've had occasion to walk by there every day during the course of the summertime. I took a look at the progress that they made, and I find it very difficult to believe that there's no one at Town Hall, when we issue permits, or permit issuer.
Dump trucks, everything.
So I don't understand. I would like to have an explanation as to why this was not monitored by the city. Well, Mr. Mayor, our urban planner that dealt with the site plan are not inspectors. They don't have a construction permit. Usually this is done when the process is followed logically or where there's an approved site plan in place, but we didn't even have a site plan that was submitted to us, Mr. Mayor. Otherwise, we could have followed up. But in these particular type of cases, we're not always aware of the construction that's going on. The city of Claresholm and Rockland was not aware of anything that had been done. It had been made aware, and when we were made aware, we advised the school board that they had to follow the process with regard to the site plan application and so on and so forth. And it was not done. They continued on with the work. That's why 80% of the work has been done already. You see, other developers are taking a look at this now, Mr. Mayor, and say, well, they can get away with it. We certainly be able to get away with it also. We can send a letter to the Ministry of Education and say, they've done this and they've done that. They have to respect the law also. As I stated, Mr. Mayor, given the changes, the amendments brought to the site plan bylaw, we'll be able to impose fines. When is this forthcoming? Yes, it is. We're trying to deal with the development matters immediately or very quickly, so to make the applicable bylaws more efficient and easily applicable. Councillor Choignard, normally when you enter into similar type works, don't you have a permit? Don't you have to set up a permit to make sure that everybody that goes by there is aware that there's a construction going on? Well, we're not talking about a construction per se. They've erected a type of building that's, well, just to explain the process, given this type of site plan, it's approved by the planning department, urban planners that draw up a site plan. And at the end of the process, someone performs an inspection to ensure that what has been built meets with all specifications set out in the site plan. So, this is not a project that we follow up day in and day out from beginning to end. So, given the process you've explained to us, it happened at one point in time that the site plan was approved at the very end. No, the site plan, Councillor Choignard, was approved at the very beginning of the process. An agreement was arrived at in between the city and the developer. We told them that they had the right to build in keeping with what is set out in the site plan? Well, are they not? I know in Ottawa, when there are when there's construction going on, the permit that's issued has to be put up on a post. But this is not a building per se, Councillor Chouanière. We're talking about a building, parking lot. I know, but if yard is of a certain size, if they want to expand this this area, then they'll have to put up a document saying that they're allowed doing the work, so that neighbors won't pick up the phone and say this is being done and that's being done, and that goes against the site plan. I know, Councillor Chouanière, and it's frustrating for those in the administration or for those of our staff that are caught up in this quandary. The ministry should be made aware, not just the ministry, but all school boards. We have to warn the ministry because they're the ones that give money to the Board of Education, the school board, to do what needs to the work that they're doing. If it's the school board, make sure that they're aware. Let's continue assessing fines. That's the best way of going about dealing with this issue. And we can sue the board if they don't pay, because they're called upon to pay for some fees, right? Yes, they were invoiced for some $18,000, and what they're asking council is to consider reducing fees or getting rid of them altogether. We don't recommend that at all. Well, they haven't cooperated. Over and above that, they haven't cooperated with the City of Clarendon and Rockland. They want a fee reduction or fee avoidance, and they didn't even follow the process, and they didn't follow the directives set out. Maybe there are some things you might not have approved. So it's easier for a developer or anyone else to do what he or she wants to do, and then they can pay the fine afterwards, whatever that small fine is, and then we might send to the school board with a CC to the ministry that this is an affront. I would make use of the word affront made to the municipality, to the City of Clarendon and Rockland. Maybe check out the word or underline the word affront. I believe it's unbelievable. School boards make use of public funds, and they have a responsibility to make sure that they're used wisely, and they're not responsible in going about doing things. Well, we were talking about budget also, and the MISB. Okay, let's go on now to the Clares Creek and Budget sanitary servicing options. Councillor Chouanière, take it away. The Committee of the Whole, Mr. Mayor, recommends that Council mandates city staff to proceed with a detailed and in-depth investigation to decide which servicing alternative would be the most efficient and cost-effective to sustain growth within the village boundaries. Seconded by Councillor Lalonde. Andre, you can't second this, but she wants to move and second this at the same time. Go ahead, Councillor Chouanière. I'm extremely happy that the sanitary sewer matter is making progress. The sanitary servicing options. This is very important to ensure proper economic development. Those citizens that don't go to Bourget, go to Limoges or Wendover or elsewhere, we're losing our citizens. We have to develop our villages and allow to ensure growth. And to ensure growth, we need everything. We need hubs, of course, to ensure growth. I was reading in the Municipal Affairs magazine, they had an article stating that they were developing hubs to which villages were attaching themselves to. But now they're recommending to have more than one hub in a given area so that people can more quickly, consult a doctor or do their grocery shopping or whatever else, where they would need services here, there, and everywhere. That would allow us to develop our villages to make them self-sufficient, and eventually that's how we go about obtaining new businesses, those that want to set up in rural areas, others that want to set up in villages, and others that want to set up in the middle of Rockland. But I'm very happy, and thank you so much for taking care of this particular matter. I'm very happy with this. Well, that's quite different, from the usual approach where people are not all that content. Does everyone have anything else to say? Much like Councillor Chouanière, I'm very happy that we'll discuss this item. I'm already in talks with a potential developer that is looking at an option to be implemented within Clarence Creek, a variable to obtain a similar type situation. But I remain perplexed with regards to the report as it stands. I have a difficulty in understanding the figures that are highlighted in this report. If we take a look, for example, at, let's take at any set of figures, for example, capital cost, $18.8 million per lot. That's certainly a mistake because it doesn't make sense. Operational and maintenance per year, per lot, $32,000. Annualized costs, dollars per lot per year. It doesn't. They don't state how much per year. Now these amounts don't make any sense in my view. Hold on a minute, Mr. Leonard. Sir, really, the figures are contained in the report, but let's not treat or analyze the figures all that much. The purpose behind the report is to perform a deeper analysis to determine the impact vis-a-vis a potential development project. To allow us, we'll have to determine which is the best of the two options that were put forward for our consideration, but I wouldn't rely on those amounts to drop a budget. I hope not, because we'll certainly encounter a very big problem. Yes, I understand. It just gives you a brief idea as to the general scope of. We even lot services, 112 proposed, another 120 lots somewhere else in Bourget. Somewhere there's 240 lots that are missing from the final tabulation. Mr. Leonard says this is only a draft version. There are also other alternatives that might be considered, and we might rely upon this to look into this in greater detail. So let's come up with more cogent figures. Any other questions? All those in favor? Carried then. Any questions to department heads? Councillor Lalonde? Mr. Leonard, we received an email from a lady on Lacasse living on Lalonde's Road at the end of the afternoon, Mrs. Cyr. She's a tad bit disappointed for the detour that was built around the Lacasse area. I assume that's in relation to the culvert we're replacing along Baseline. Why did we choose Lacasse instead of Bouvier? Where there's sufficient asphalt to perform the detour work, because there's a road on residents on Lacasse Street that have had their road reopened after a year and a half, and now we've increased the traffic flow there. That's really beyond belief. So when we put in detour signs that the people be detoured on proper roads, or maybe I drove in from Joannis this morning, the signs had been put up. I didn't even hear advanced talk of this. Bang, it happened overnight. I spoke to a resident tonight, and she told me that her children were not able to take the school bus to attend school because of that. Mr. Leonard, well, these needs have been identified in the past. Well, we'll certainly make sure that people are notified as quickly as possible. But those living along Lacasse Road, when we're putting up detour signs, we're trying to control the traffic flow to divert it onto the original street as soon as possible. Most of the people involved in such projects cross east, west, west, east, and then travel north, south to get onto Caro, and then have access to Clarence Rockland or Rockland direct. So Lacasse was the artery closest to that area that would allow people to get back on track. Or well, because La Casse Road is a gravel road. It's harder to maintain. It's harder to keep gravel, stationary on the road bed. There's an increase in traffic flow. It's going to cost us more to spread additional gravel there. I believe that we received notice of this at the end of last week. So it might not click for them, but it does click for us, where we have to take proper action. And we should give them at least 2 to 3 weeks advance notice before anything is done. In any event, is there an option to change the detour route right now? Well, we might change. I'm just asking the question here. Look, Bouvier Road is not all that much more adequate than other roadways. It's hard to come up with an adequate roadway, to accommodate the detoured traffic. It's unfortunate for those good folks living on Lagarde Street. This street has been repaved or reworked completely. But can we put in a little bit of calcium to prevent dust from permeating the area? Yes, we've taken steps for this. Culverts, Mr. Mayor, some residents live in rural areas and say that there are some old metallic culverts that are rusted out and perforated. Now, they were asking the municipality to at least change those culverts and to put in those new type culverts. Is it the City of Clarendon and Rockland's responsibility to change culverts in rural areas? Well, there was a bylaw that was enacted in 2017. It's not incumbent upon the Clarendon and Rockland. There are no municipalities within Prescott Russell that will replace culverts. We were contending culverts in rural areas. We had municipal roads, county roads. The counties weren't paying. We were caught in a quandary, fixing up county roads. Could we not at least replace these old culverts? We already have a bylaw that we've enacted that covers this situation. I know that council wished to change some culverts, but could not do so unless we include them in capital expenditures. No. When we need to change for culverts to perform positive drainage, then that's fine. But if it's a culvert that's deteriorated, that's old, then the onus is upon neighboring owners to take care of this. But water can't even seep into the ditch. It's that blocked up. Well, then we can perform repair work, but then it's charged back to the residents. We can also clean up the culverts, Mr. Lenart. Well, we can do so if they're in good condition. If they're in poor condition, we'll advise that resident that needs to change the culvert to alleviate the water situation. But we can change. We've never done this in the past. We can change culverts and impose additional fees on the general tax rolls. Well, this has been lasting for the past year and a half. Other questions?